They came to me actually and said, we want you to be the CEO of our business. And this was a few years ago. And at that time, I literally laughed at them and said, you're insane. Not only do I not have that skill set, I don't know how to be a CEO. I'm not qualified for that. I'm not going to be an executive. I'm a salesperson. How limiting is that? It's not just colleagues. I think you think about your clients. One of my clients are all of a sudden like, oh, she thinks she's going to be a CEO now. Fast forward, and it's amazing kind of where you can get to in your growth. So yeah, I took that opportunity. I said, yeah, I'd love to be the CEO. And our website has just gone live within the last couple of weeks. And being able to look at myself on that website with that job title and not feel a shred of imposter syndrome or like that icky feeling that you get inside when you're like, oh my God, am I actually going to put CEO on my LinkedIn profile? And it was like, no, I am totally ready to step into this new role that I'm going to figure out this year. So that felt really, really good and was like a moment for me of, yes, see how much you've grown. And when we get those opportunities to see that in different ways, it's just so gratifying.
Big fucking dreams. All right then. You got this.
Hey, big fucking dreamers. So pumped to be here with you today. And I'm extremely excited to have my guest, Lindsay Zoney. She has worked at places like Skillsoft, lynda.com, LinkedIn. She is also regularly described as one of the best sales professionals anyone has ever seen. I have heard her described as that in so many different conversations. And as if that wasn't enough, she is also the CEO of the Growth Option. She's a client, she's a friend, she's wildly sharp, she's deeply grounded, and she's just an all-around badass motherfucker. Lindsay Zoney, I'm so excited to have you on Big Fucking Dreams podcast. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
So recently, you have just become the CEO and really created this amazing business called The Growth Option. And I'm wondering if you can just tell me a little bit about what your reaction was when you saw yourself on the website listed as CEO and what happened to you.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So this is a business that I've built with 3 other people who've been in the space for quite a while. But yes, they came to me actually quite a while ago and said, we want you to be the CEO of our business. And this was a few years ago. And at that time, I literally laughed at them and said, you're insane. Not only do I not have that skill set, I don't know how to be a CEO. I'm not qualified for that. And then fast forward, and it's amazing kind of where you can get to in your growth. So yeah, I took that opportunity. I said, yeah, I'd love to be the CEO. And our website has just gone live within the last couple of weeks. And being able to look at myself on that website with that job title and not feel a shred of imposter syndrome or like that icky feeling that you get inside when you're like, oh my God, am I actually going to put CEO on my LinkedIn profile? Like, I'm such a wanker. Who's people are going to, all those things that go through your mind of, am I qualified for this? Am I good enough for this? And it was like, no, I am totally ready to step into this new role that I'm going to figure out this year. So that felt really, really good and was like a moment for me of being like, yes, see how much you've grown, and when we get those opportunities to see that in different ways, it's just so gratifying.
What do you think it is? I mean, obviously, you're, a LinkedIn employee. I was a LinkedIn employee. I think there's something hyper specific that not only happens to LinkedIn employees, but it's this mindset of like, what are my colleagues going to think? And almost about how like the price of admission is like shame and embarrassment. Like, I think that is so true. But what do you think? Because I know you're an extremely introspective person and you're kind of always examining your thought patterns. Like, what do you think that is of what will other people think about me?
Yeah, I can't speak for everyone, but I think it's a combination of 2 things. I think that it's first and foremost the deep fear that we have of failure or walking into an unknown that we're not completely certain with, right? So it may not be a fear of failure, but it's like, it's that imposter syndrome. It's that I don't fully believe that I have the skill, I have the ability to not only be in this role, but to do it successfully, right? So it's am I good enough for it? And are people going to think that I'm good enough for it? And then on the other side, and can I actually make it something that I'm proud of, something that I'm successful at? And so I think that, yeah, we've talked a lot about what is the hardest thing about deciding to be an entrepreneur. It's that believing that I can do it and working through the things that you have inside of you that say, I'm not the person that starts a company, right? I'm not going to be an executive. I'm a salesperson. I would say that to people like, I'm just a salesperson. How limiting is that? It's not just colleagues. I think you think about your clients. One of my clients are all of a sudden like, oh, she thinks she's going to be a CEO now. Like, so you have to, and that for me was a very long journey, I think, of a lot of other things underneath there that would manifest in all different ways. But one of them was with this sort of deep self-limiting belief that that was not something that I could ever do.
Yeah, the limiting belief that like maybe I'm not enough or maybe my skill set isn't, even though I'm highly competent and highly capable.
Yeah. It's amazing how your brain can so easily be like, yeah, I know I'm really good at this. I finally got to a point where I was like, yeah, I know I'm really good at this. I now have a whole body of evidence of all these years. And thank you so much for such a, what's the right word? Introduction. But like after so many years of having success, you're like, yeah, okay, I actually am really good at this. I'm good at this and I feel confident in this. But our brains don't always go, I actually have this. Look at the skill set and look at all of the things that you actually know how to do. That is like lift and shift into this because I'm just a salesperson. Sales is what I do. Sure, I could go work for another tech company in a sales role and be super successful. But this is so scary. This is A, B, C, D, E, F that I have no idea how to do. And how could I figure that out,
And I think that one of the main differences I see in corporate versus in entrepreneurship is that in corporate, it's often other people telling you no. And in entrepreneurship, it's often you telling yourself no.
Oh, I could not agree more. I'm just barely on the precipice of this. You have a lot more experience in it. But that's completely right, right? Corporate, oftentimes, you're fighting the system, right? Whereas this, you're fighting yourself.
Yeah, you're fighting yourself. Am I good enough? Am I going to look stupid? What are my colleagues going to think? I'm doing this whole thing really publicly. What if I fail? And it's all these different parts of ourselves. And I know that, you and I have been doing IFS, like you are internal family systems therapy. You've been looking at your parts and even you talking about kind of how successful that you have been, but then how even like happiness and like that not enoughness feeling can still be there of like how it even translates into, but maybe I'm not enough for entrepreneurship. Or when I know, so like I said in the introduction, so many people, even on sales calls, people have been like, I don't know if you know Lindsay Zoney, but this has happened on like multiple sales calls. I was like, yeah, I know Lindsay, but like I feel like I don't know if you know her, but I admire her so much and she's amazing in her attitude. But then there are these parts of us that still sometimes think that, we're not good enough. So if we can just almost explore like what it is that these parts are telling us and how you've worked and transcended some of those. And even some of them that, I don't know if they ever fully go away because we're not enlightened. But
yeah, absolutely. And I just want to go back to something that you just said a minute ago too about like, the fighting in corporate versus the entrepreneurship piece. The other thing I think that you have to get ready for in going into entrepreneurship, right? When you're in corporate, you're in a constant feedback loop. People are always giving you feedback on your behavior, right? From, people that are underneath you, lateral to you, working cross-functionally with you, and then obviously everyone very senior, right? So you do things that are good and you start getting all of this praise. But when you move into doing something on your own, whether you have business partners or you're doing it by yourself, right? It's like, okay, how am I going to know if I'm doing well? So having that really solid sense of like, this is why I'm doing this. This is how I'm doing this. Of course, I'm going to fail in this. And when I fail, I'm going to take that as an opportunity. But being able to really build that up, right? Because as soon as you're putting something out there that is yours or a part of you, the opportunity, and I think that feedback that you're getting, it's not just about like performance in a sales cycle, which feels like it's about you too, but in this, I think such a deeper way. And so, yeah, let's talk about those parts.
Well, it's almost like I actually feel like it's like self-trust as well. Like, do you have the trust that's like, I can figure this out? Because you don't have that. Like, you don't have that. I mean, you have the feedback loop in terms of like, is my business making money or not? That like, can I survive? Like, that is like a pretty, am I going up? Am I going down? Like, that's a definite feedback loop. But I think something like the skills gap from entrepreneurship and from corporate, it's so real and it can be so big. But it's nothing that a highly trained, competent person can like. And I remember you and I talking about this. But do you want to talk about that conversation?
Oh, yeah. I remember when we were talking about this, when I was just telling you about this deep fear, right? I'm like, this is like primal fear for me. And I can talk a little bit more about what I uncovered with that in terms of the money, the security, and that whole piece, those parts that were coming up. But like, I remember you said that to me and you're like, Lindsay, you're competent. You figured this stuff out. Of course it's hard, but it's not that hard. And you just do it. You fail, you figure it out, you learn from this and you iterate. Like that's what you basically been doing your whole career. And then obviously to hear it from you and you've done this and you have this business, it's like, yeah, of course, but it's interesting when that fear starts to take over those parts that are still in that place. How do you then start to learn how to relate to those and bring those in, right? Into the conversation, into how you're relating with them. And I guess really into learning how to work with them to make them your superpower instead of sort of your Achilles heel in those same ways.
Yeah, because I think that one of my former business coaches said this, that on the journey, the evolution of what are the parts of us that come out and in different phases of entrepreneurship. And when you're kind of like from 0 to 10K months, so much of the fear is primal. Like, can I survive? Because it's like, do I have enough money to live? And I do think that if you're making this transition, like something that I do say is like, do you have a year's worth of income? Can your business make no money? Like you need to actually have a safety net before you make this leap. But a lot of it is just this like primal fear of like a part may not think that you're going to survive. So let's go into a bit of parts because I know that you've worked through a lot of this and even like what we've called, I don't know if you coined the term, but we spoke about like this financial dysmorphia and like success dysmorphia as well. Let's go into financial dysmorphia because I think that's a really interesting thing. And like, what are the parts of you that almost are driving that?
Yeah, I have to give credit to a really good friend of mine in California who, after being back home on a prior trip, I was saying to the girls, like, I'm getting ready to make this move. And I know, like, on paper, it's so fine that I'm cutting the tie from the corporate salary and cutting the golden handcuffs. It's going to be so fine for a while, even if I didn't make a dollar, But even seeing it on paper is not the same thing as feeling it inside. So she said, Lindsay, like a lot of people have body dysmorphia, you have financial dysmorphia. And I looked at her and I said, I know. I go, and I finally am figuring out where that comes from. This is something that I've done a lot of work. This has probably been the biggest component for me of this transformation and personal work that I've done personally that we're now doing with other people with the growth option because it changed me so much. And when you start being able to really sort of unpack cycles and things that they're subconscious to you, like you sort of know that it's something that you're nervous about and you're saving and you're this and you have these numbers in your head, but until you're moving into a situation where you are like out of the safety zone, you don't really know how much that's actually running your life. And what I learned from both that work and then I think we even went deeper on was really getting to the core of like the fact that because I have worked and had a job since I was very young, I paid for school. There were a lot of things about the way that I was raised. My parents were very hard workers. They were both teachers. And they taught me that you could have what you want in life, but if you want it, you have to work for it. And I worked, it was like, and I'm going to work so that one day I can have the things that other people have that I didn't maybe have when I was younger. And I'm going to like be financially secure and I'm going to be able to like buy myself a Gucci purse, at the time, like, go on a vacation and stay in a nice hotel when you're younger. And so over time, though, you don't really realize how deep these messages are. And then even when you start getting more financial success, I think one of the things that you start to realize is that, like, I was never chasing like success, but I also was really looking for that like recognition. And I think so these things really kind of went hand in hand for me, the financial success, but also the way that it made me feel to be recognized, because I always felt like I had imposter syndrome. Everyone else was better at this job. Like I was never as smart or as good or as this person who did that deal. So those two things kind of walked alongside. The first one that I was really able to unpack for me, which was the success really being linked to the self-esteem. And that was really like a slap in the face for me in the sense that I always felt I had a really confident sense of self. I was very much looked at as a leader in my friend group. It was like, I was the girl who would speak up. I was the girl who was like 24 and was like negotiating job offers. So to think that like, wow, this is what my self-esteem is actually linked to, like that doesn't compute with my personality. But what I realized was I was in this cycle of chasing success that never felt like enough. There was a year at LinkedIn where I won that award, where I was given the award for being the number one salesperson at LinkedIn. And accepting that, all I could think was, there's so many people here that deserve this more than I do. And how am I going to back this up? So those two things, right? So you're in persistent cyclical behavior patterns where I'm chasing that. And that was how, through the help of some of my early coaches, I was able to realize, wow, this is really where I've been getting my self-esteem from. And then I started on a process to decouple those two things, which quite frankly was very scary for me, because I was like, this is something about myself that I'm really proud of. Like, I am proud that like everything I have worked for, and done it like ethically and to the best of my ability. I've learned from all of those things. So, but what I realized as I started working through this was that, first of all, just because you move from like having that self-esteem coupled to that success, it doesn't jeopardize you having future success. All you're doing is moving from something that is extrinsically motivating to something that is intrinsically motivating. And in doing that, what actually happened over the years that I was working through this at LinkedIn was that I actually had just as much, if not more, success. But even bigger than that, the feedback that I got from the people that were above me and the people that were lateral to me, that were working with me, about how I was working, the level of calm that I had, the higher level negotiation skill, the way that they felt empowered working with me, so many things that just changed as a result of that. And so that was sort of the first step of that. I think second piece that we've talked about is like this financial dysmorphia, right? Which is like this deep fear of, am I going to be okay? Because I have amazing, loving parents, but I've always taken care of myself financially. I don't have a partner. I don't have anyone else. So it's sort of like, is this the right thing? And I think that's what keeps us small sometimes, right? Because corporate is safe. The sales job is safe. The stock is safe. Doing this is safe. And so working through not only the beliefs around, am I good enough to be able to do this, but also, and it's going to be okay because I know the security comes from in here. Yes. Does money provide security? Absolutely. Do we need it to live? Sure. And do we need it to, like, all of those things? But money was security, and money was also freedom for me in a lot of ways. And those are probably the two biggest things that have changed, especially the piece with freedom, because now I finally learned that freedom is about what's happening up here, right? It's about what's happening in your mind and your body. That is how you feel freedom and joy. So sure, does money provide an aspect of freedom to allow you to do things? Yes, but that's really what's changed with me through this work that I've done prior to us working together. And I think where we've even gone deeper as I'm now moving into this next step of my growth, which is moving into running this business with 3 other people and trying to grow it into the type of a business that we want to have that's going to make a positive change in the world.
Oh, I could go into so many different directions from there. And it's so, I want to first talk about, this like coupling of self-esteem and success and how that actually isn't, well, it's not self-esteem. Like it is so kind of dependent. But then also what you said, when people start to develop self-esteem that's not built on their performance, there can be so much fear in that of like, well, wait a second, I thought I really liked this. And wait a second, but I am successful. Why would I change it? Or will I be as successful?
Yeah.
And it sounds to me like you really navigated that fear and then found even more success, but without almost berating yourself or having a toxic relationship with yourself that was somehow contingent upon you performing.
Yeah. And that was a journey, and I had like amazing coaches, right? But all of this starts, and I think like just for people that are listening, right? It's not like everything in my life was going great. I was like loving my job, wanting to move to the next level. It's not that I didn't love my job, but I had reached a point where I was like, I'm stuck. There's a dissatisfaction, right? I was kind of like, this isn't fulfilling me anymore to the level that it was before. And I don't really feel like there's somewhere for me to go in this organization next that feels for me like something that's going to really light me up. And so in that stuckness was when I was like, I use this analogy where I'm like, I feel like I'm in a glass house and I can see outside. I've built the house. I built this incredible glass house. It's beautiful. It's exactly what I wanted. But now I don't want to be in it anymore. And I can see everyone else outside of it. And all I have to do is just smash my fist through and the whole thing will shatter and I can walk right out. But I am too scared to do that. And that for me was when I was like, I have got to get working on like what's going on in here. Like this is really, really big for me. And that was how I started to understand, okay, there's really something else. And I have to start building up wholeheartedness and emotional wholeness within myself in a very different way if I want to cultivate a different life for myself, or even think about a different type of a vocation that's very outside of where I've been. And that started that process of unpacking some of these cycles, meditating, daily meditation. As you know, for me, it's just non-negotiable. It has been one of the single biggest things that have helped with this. So doing the work consciously, unpacking things that are happening in the subconscious, letting meditation work on clearing out some of those beliefs, and then working on replacing them with new beliefs that are powerful, self-driven beliefs around who I am and what I can do. And you do that, based on some of the evidence in the past, but after you've worked on where did these original belief systems come from? When did I start to believe that, love is conditional, that I can't take any time for rest, that, I'm not good enough if I'm not doing X? Okay, so we go back and we start healing those. We go into where did this come from? And how do I start to work with this and move some of it out so that I can then operate out of these new beliefs that I'm building that are based on who I am and who I always was, but have gotten covered up with a lot of shit along the way.
And when we look at those parts, if we can talk about, you and I did a session on this the other day about how we get stuck at a younger age. Because when we think about where did these, let's say, financial beliefs come from, and then how all of a sudden you might be in your 30s, 40s, 50s, but it's actually an 18-year-old running the show.
Yeah. These belief systems come from everywhere. They come from culture. They come from parents. They come from peers. They come from teachers. They come from experiences that we've had. There's a huge body of research that says that any type of an experience in childhood or adolescence that produces a negative emotion, so it doesn't have to be something that's seriously traumatic, but if it's a negative experience, that it imprints on the child. And in that time, and I say child because this is like anything under 25 when you're talking about full adult maturity. So into adolescenthood and even into those early 20 years. But like you have these things that happen. And at the time, you don't have enough worldview, you don't have enough insight and foresight to be able to draw accurate conclusions about some of those things. So when certain things happen, you draw conclusions in sort of that limited scope of awareness that you have about yourself, other people, and the world. And you don't even realize that you've drawn these conclusions, but they range from everything from women have to be thin and beautiful to be loved, to the world is an unsafe place, to it's better for me not to speak up, to emotions don't have a place or emotions aren't safe. And just from some of the ones that I've named, I'm sure people can start thinking about, you start to get these, and this is how you end, this is how you start operating in the world. And you don't really realize that you're doing that. But as you start to do this work and uncover these patterns and then go back into some of these experiences, you realize, oh, there's this part of me that's still there that still thinks that I shouldn't be resting or rest is lazy. Or when you start to do this, you realize, okay, that part of me is really only 13 or 18, right? And so, this is what you and I have worked through and I have done prior work on as well, is how do we start to relate to that part of us when it comes up in the moment so that we don't let it take over and start to run our lives or our businesses or our relationships in a way that we don't want that to be happening, that we want to be doing it from this piece of us, right? So some of that magic, I think, really happens when you have that awareness of it. You're working on some of the somatic components of how is it manifesting in my body? Where do I feel it? And then when it's coming up, it's like, okay, here's how I can work with this in the moment so that we can then change some of those patterns, some of those belief systems.
And I think we even spoke about before we started working together, like you don't want to go into entrepreneurship and have these same exact parts running the show, because you will just, and what I see is sometimes people like think that leaving one company to go to another, maybe that's going to fix it. But then 6 months in, whatever, the boss is still an asshole. You still got the, whatever it tends to be, usually tends to follow if there is not that work done and that almost like pause of the system to be like, what is actually going on here? How do I heal this? And I've seen you really be brave with some of these big parts that have been there for a while and start to say, okay, actually, this 18-year-old is not going to be responsible for my life. It's a bit dangerous if that 18-year-old actually is.
Yeah.
And how do I be the actual adult here?
Yeah. Yeah. John Kabat-Zinn, who's like the father of mindfulness, has a quote, wherever you go, there you are. And it is so true, because we are very good at, changing things out here. I'm going to change the job. It's this, it's the relationship, it's this. And then you move into another situation and that's sort of the same thing that's kind of coming up again, right? So you're like, okay, how do I start to work with what's happening here? And it's scary in here. It can be very lonely in here. There can be a lot of really unpleasant emotions in here. This work is not for the faint of heart. But for me, I'm a huge advocate of therapy. My dad is a therapist, but for me, this work has been the thing that has helped me to A, more deeply understand and have compassion for myself in so many ways, and B, be able to actually start to make change that isn't what I call like white knuckle change, where it's like, we've talked about this a lot, where it's working at the behavior level, right? It's like, I'm not going to date those kind of men anymore, or I'm not going to drink so much, whatever it is. You're working at the behavior level. It's like, well, let's go down and work at what's driving the behavior, right? And then let's work on trying to heal some of those things. Let's work at that level and stay at that level, which can be painful work with stuff. We all have our stuff. It doesn't matter. Some people have way, way worse stuff than others, but we all have our stuff. We all have our conditioning that we've come up with. So yeah, how do we work at that level to be able to then get that behavior change? And by the way, like you mentioned this a little bit before, but when you continue to grow, like I would love to think I've arrived, it's like you do work for a couple of years and you're like, I've been doing this work for 3 years. Am I ever going to get there? It's like, well, no, you're going to get there with this stuff and you're going to get there here. But if you want to keep growing, courage is doing it afraid, right? I'm going into this big next step. And that's why, like, when you and I started talking, I was like, hey, there's still this thing and I feel it really coming up, but I know there's that quiet voice that says, this is the right thing, you know? It's like, how do you do it and walk through afraid? And then you phone a friend.
Yeah.
You go, okay, what's going on with me? And how do I keep growing through this? And who can I find to help me to do that? And I think that probably that's why you and I are both so passionate about this too, right? Because when you're like, I found something, it's really worked for me and it's really transformed me in this way. I want to do that for other people. I want to do that for other men and women in the world. Years ago, I remember when I was sort of starting this work, you know, had gone on a couple of retreats and had met the guys who are my business partners that have deeply been my coaches over the years. And one of them asked me, I was saying, you know, I'm feeling really stuck in this job. I'm feeling this. And he said, well, what do you really want to do? And I was like, I don't know. And he was like, yes, you do. He's like, he goes, what do you really want to do? And I was like, I want to empower women. Which sounds like, but that was it. I was like, I don't really know I want to do it, but like, I know that I've got things in here that I can help other people with, and I've got this experience. I don't know how I want to do it, but that's what I want to do. And I was just thinking about this the other day, actually, because we're starting to think about like, how do we go out and say what we do as an organization and get other people excited? How do I talk about this? And I hadn't thought about that in a while, but it came up for me. And so I think going back to what you were sort of originally asking there around like, how do we step into reframing some of these parts while recognizing that they're still coming up for us and allowing them to be there as we're going on this journey of courage, stepping forward with the fear, but into the thing that we really want to move into.
I had a sponsor say to me, I heard it at a meeting, and I like a therapist had said to someone, which was like, you know, it really takes 2 years to like really break codependence. And I said that to my sponsor, who's I think 35 years sober. And she goes, 2 years? I've been working on this shit for 35 years. And it was just this, you know, this, because we're not enlightened, because we are flawed of like, okay, we never truly arrive here. And then there's kind of just deeper and deeper work. What was the catalyst that almost brought, because you have done so much work on yourself and now you are facilitating that for others. And I love the like, I just want to empower women, like that kind of coming out here, because it's really similar to me. And, you know, we've got very similar parts that we've spoken about. But what was the real catalyst in your life for coming to this type of work?
So I had moved to Byron and I had done a bit of meditation before with like the habits and mindfulness stuff. And I have been highly anxious most of my adult life, was diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder, was medicated for a large part of my life. I've really struggled with anxiety. And I think I have moved to Byron Bay, Australia, for those that don't know. And it's a place of like healing. And there's a lot of arts, meditation, and spiritual community. But I was like, I really need and want to start trying to build a meditation practice again, because I think that it's like one of the single biggest things that I can do to help to reduce my anxiety and improve my sleep. Like that was really the crux of where this all started. And I knew that like I needed accountability in a community. And there were some people that I met there and got connected to, but I was very lucky. A friend of a friend, I was sharing this with her and she basically said, I have just met this incredible organization. Like you've got to come on this retreat with me. And I went on this retreat. They just resonated with me so much, taking a secular, very science-based approach to it, the care, everything else. But when we started on this retreat, they started with helping us to understand like how your mindsets form, like what is adult development? How do we grow up as adults? And I was just like, whoa, there is so much here for me. And in that experience, I had gone through a divorce that was probably at that point, maybe had been finished for about 2 years, and tried pretty much everything you can imagine to work through the healing from that. I laid on crystals. I went to try religion. I tried therapy. I tried energy. You know what I mean? I want to really allow this to be something that I'm not going to bring into a future relationship. And I need to have accountability around working through that before I do that. It was on this first retreat that I went on that it became very clear to me in a very beautiful way from one of my coaches that I still had a lot of anger that I was dealing with him in relation to that. I said, no, I'm not really mad at him. I was like, hold on a minute. That's not totally authentic. Let me back up. I was like, no, I know that sounded mad, but it sounded mad because that situation is fucked up. And, anyone would be mad about that. But I've forgiven him. I've chosen to forgive him over this. And what he said was he looked at me and said, Lindsay, forgiveness and emotional completion with someone from your past are not the same thing. And I was like, I don't understand. And he goes, yeah, not the same thing. I go, okay, I don't really understand exactly what you said. And that's when he said, would you trust me to work with you on this to try to fully release this? And I said, sure, Kev. I go, if you think that you've got something that I haven't already gotten from somewhere else, why not? And of course he was right. Of course I was able to clear that out. And I haven't had any type of a relationship with my ex-husband for many years. But if I ran into him on the street, I would walk over and give him a hug. And yeah, I don't carry that anger anymore or animosity, which is such a beautiful thing because it freed me from that. So that is what started me on. After that, it was like, okay, now we've cleared that out. Now let's try to figure out what else is going on with me and where I want to go in my life. And that was really how this kind of all started. And as you said before, it's peeling back layers, So you start realizing, okay, there's something with this. Okay, there's something with this with the help of great coaches. And then you start working on how you want to heal and change those things. And as you also said before, like, it's a lifelong thing. It's not going to be 2 years to get over codependence. You're probably going to work with this for 35 years, but you probably had at least 35 years before that of learning this behavior and using it. So we're unwinding 20, 30, 40 years of behavioral patterns and beliefs. I say beliefs in quotes because it's like our belief system that we think is actually true that we're learning how to change. So
Yeah. I'm so curious what were and this is just me kind of being a coach, like when you spoke about the emotional processes, or what were the processes that you used to release that anger? Because I absolutely love what he said. What was it? It was that like forgiveness and what was it? Emotional completion. Oh, was a knife to my heart.
It's a 5 or 6 stage process that starts with recognizing it and then accessing it. And this is with anyone that we have: anger, resentment, regret, guilt, shame. And most of us, if we're being honest, we don't just have one of those things in our life, right? We've got quite a few.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, it's going back to that experience. It's going through visual regressions. It's feeling that. It's a process of verbally and emotionally expressing through a variety of different methods that we use with people to do that in a safe space. It's physical expressing through different somatic processes to allow that to come out. And then moving through actually, releasing those things when people are ready to do that. And depending on who it is and the situations, some of these take more than one for us to be able and ready to actually release these completely, because there's a reason why we get stuck in resentment and regret. When we're holding on to these things, the body and brain have a reason for it. And it's different based on which one of those it is. But we work with that. We work with that and we help you to understand that. We help you to understand why you've been dealing with it for so long. And then, we work through this 5 or 6 step process to releasing.
Can you explain a bit about the somatic process and what that means?
Yeah, there's a lot of research now that basically backs up the idea that trauma and pain live in the body at a cellular level. There's a great book called The Body Keeps the Score, if anyone's interested in going deeper on this, or Molecules of Emotion is another great one. So when things have happened to us, there's an emotional and a mental component of the memory of that, right? The way that it made us feel, the way it makes us feel today when we think about it. But there's also a physiological component to it of how it stays within us. And so there's lots of different types of processes that you can do to do that. We specifically use one that's called an anger release quite a bit. There are some types of breathwork techniques like circular breathing that will work through with people as well. With the emotional completion process, when it's specific to a person, we find that working through these really powerful anger releases that are set up and very safe for people to be able to do that are actually some of the most powerful ways for them to let those things go once we've worked through the accessing and the verbal expressing of some of these things. And we're asking them to go back into, as I did, these incredibly painful situations that we have like spent our whole lives trying to not think about. Or we work so hard just to keep a lid on this stuff. It's like, I don't want to go back and think about what happened with my parents with an abuse situation, or even just like a painful rejection. Anything that has caused our belonging needs to be violated, our security, physical or emotional, our self-esteem needs to be violated. Like, who wasn't bullied at some point on the playground? And when those things are violated, these are things that stay in store. Obviously, some are much worse and they're causing us a lot more angst and pain in our life because of how they're driving our patterns of behavior. But it's going back into re-experiencing those things so that we can be able to get the emotional cycle to complete that didn't complete when we were children, and that we as adults are in control of that happening.
And what's the feeling like after it's complete? What have you felt the changes in you have been?
I mean, after you go through that whole experience, it's very physically intense. You can feel incredible relief. Like after going through these somatic experiences, there's usually a combination of physical exhaustion, a variety of emotion, and then after that, a very deep, profound sense of release, healing, and personal power in a lot of ways, even in a lot of these experiences. And everyone, like, they've been different for me depending on sort of what's come up and how I've processed it. The stuff, with my ex-husband, I did that on a retreat over a course of a couple of days. And I legitimately felt like I kind of had a hangover for about 4 days physically, your energy and everything else. But then after that, it's like, you come into this
You're
sort of
enlightened. Yeah.
yeah. Everyone's different, in terms of exactly how they feel after they go through this. Some people have immediate release and that immediate feeling immediately powerful, and other people, it might take them a few days or a week. And honestly, some people are not ready to release. And if you're ready to release something, you can feel that. And it's like we never push people. And I was never pushed to release anything that I wasn't ready to release. It's like we respect that. Okay, let's just put out an intention to release this then. So yeah. And in the days and the weeks and the months that follow, I think that's really when you start to integrate this, right? Because oftentimes this is in container of a day or a couple of days where we're doing these things, but it's how are things changing after this? How are things changing in the way that I'm thinking about this person or situation? I'm showing up. And that's where where we see and say, that's how we know that we've really started making changes in the small things on the day, kind of back to where we started, right? The small things where you can see that I've grown a little bit here. And I recognize this is something that has changed.
And what would you say, like, let's say someone's listening to this and they're in corporate, their life isn't what they want. They haven't quite taken the leap. Maybe they're at the beginning of this type of journey. What guidance or advice would you give them to help them through this process?
Thanks for asking the question. It's funny because the last retreat that I was doing facilitation on, I mentioned that this is where I'm at. And I kind of have now become I'm not really happy in my job. And you're sort of the person that's doing this question. So the advice that I would give them is, I think, twofold. When people are like, I don't really know what else I would do, which is the same boat that I was in, like people say, like, don't ask what is my purpose, ask like, what am I good at? What do I enjoy? What does the world need? I think are the three questions. I actually think that there's some really good validity to that, right? Like, what am I good at? What do I enjoy? And what does the world need? But really more than that, like I would ask them to reflect on that same question, like, what lights you up? Because there was a point in your life where you decided to move into this, even if you just fell into it, or maybe you never really loved it, never really felt like you fit there. But like, I love sales. I think it's a profession that's done poorly so often. And I think that when it's done right, it can actually truly be about helping people. And I love it. I absolutely love working with people and helping solve problems. There's a reason why I was 18 years old and decided to get a marketing degree. And I've literally worked in sales my entire career. But I got to a point where it wasn't lighting me up anymore in that way. So it's kind of like, okay, this does and did light me up. Like, what do I want to sell? Or what do I? So I'm giving that example because like we can often get really sort of disenchanted and frustrated and burned out in the job that we're in. But I would encourage you to sit down and think about like, what do or did I love about this? And then like, what does light me up? And then what are all the stories that I'm telling myself about why I can't do this? And when you get those stories down that you're telling yourself, you now have the list of things that you can go and work on if you want to make the changes. And most of us have a pretty long list of all the reasons why it makes absolutely no sense. Underneath those are going to be the things that you'll want to start working on to be able to start to make internal changes for, then external action.
Yeah. And then you should either call me or call Lindsay.
Yeah, exactly. And then call Hannah or myself or both of us.
And we'll help you work through them. We'll help you resolve them. Well, Lindsay, this was such a beautiful interview. Thank you so much for sharing it with us. And just the last question, which is, what is your next big fucking dream?
To make the growth option a really successful, thriving business. And that's the result, I guess. The dream is that we are building heart-centered leaders who are people who take full accountability for their lives, for their anxiety, for their actions, and turn into and want to build organizations and people underneath them that feel good about who they are working there and that can thrive. And like, that is my real passion in working in organizations, is with leaders who truly want to be better. And so many leaders do. Like, these are not skills, I think, that a lot of traditional leadership teaches in corporate to help people to really know and understand themselves and then be able to recognize things and to change things that they need to show up the way that they need to in learning the skills to do that. So that is, I guess, what I really am passionate about on the corporate side and in working with leaders in corporate. And on the personal side, it's like, I want more people to feel the level of like ease and freedom that I've had. Not that obviously I'm there, I live in that state 24/7, but like to feel like you actually can do this. Hannah gave me such a like glowing intro, but let me just say, like, for me to make this jump that I can and will do this is oceans, guys. And yeah, I want to help other people do that because there's so many big fucking dreamers, badass men and women out there that are dying in jobs and doing things because they feel like they have to. And it's exciting for me to think about a world where like we're all operating out of our best and truest selves and being able to do the things and contribute from that space. So
beautiful. I'm like, I love that. Coffee as well. Great coffee. Where can people find you, connect with you, find out more about the growth option if they're curious about working with you or the programs that you guys offer?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So thegrowthoption.com. We'll be running additional courses on the personal side. You can always reach out to me at LinkedIn, Lindsay Zoney. And yeah, thanks for having me on. The show notes, I think that you're going to do with all your podcasting magic.
Yeah, perfect. So all the information will be in the show notes. And Lindsay, thank you so much for being here and being on Big Fucking Dreams.
Thank you for letting me be interviewed for my first podcast. It's been so fun.
You'll have to come back.
I'd love to.
Big fucking dream.